What if, just for a moment, Earth stopped spinning? No warning, no preparation. Everything, oceans, air, cities, and even you, still moving at over 1,600 kilometers, 1,000 pounds, until it's not. This isn't just a sci-fi thought experiment. It's a terrifying chain reaction waiting to unfold. Let's break it down. Instant chaos. The first few seconds, Earth spins at roughly 160 kilometers per hour, 1,040 mph, at the equator. This rotation is what gives us day and night, but it's also what keeps everything, from oceans to the air we breathe, moving in balance. But if the Earth suddenly stopped spinning, even for a second, the consequences would be instant and apocalyptic. The atmosphere keeps moving. The atmosphere isn't bolted to the planet. It's been spinning along with Earth for billions of years. So when the planet stops, the air doesn't. It keeps moving at its previous velocity, over 1,600 kilometers. That means hurricane-force winds, but magnified tenfold. We're talking about global winds powerful enough to flatten forests, rip the roofs off mountains, and sweep entire cities into the air. These winds would rush from west to east, turning the very air around us into a wall of destruction. Skyscrapers and cities obliterated. Even the most advanced human structures aren't built to resist such forces. Skyscrapers would twist and snap, bridges would collapse, and urban areas would be demolished in seconds. It would be like every building on Earth facing the force of a nuclear shockwave. At the same time, humans, cars, animals, thrown like toys, everything not embedded in bedrock would be thrown. You, sitting in a chair, launched eastward at over 1,000 miles per hour. Cars, trains, planes, animals, debris, all airborne in a lethal storm of metal and stone. The sheer kinetic energy would be fatal in most cases, not from impact with the ground, but from colliding with everything else flying through the air. Even the ground would shake. The Earth's crust, which isn't a solid block but a puzzle of tectonic plates, would suddenly shift. This would trigger global earthquakes and volcanic eruptions as the stress violently redistributes itself. Entire regions would collapse, and dormant volcanoes might awaken all at once. Real-world comparison: car crash. Physics. To put it in perspective, if you're in a car crash at 100 km/h, your body feels an immense jolt unless you're wearing a seatbelt. Now imagine that same principle, but scaled up to 1,600 km/h. No seatbelts, no brakes, just raw, unfiltered planetary inertia. A new planet shape, and it's bad news. As Earth spins, it slightly bulges at the equator due to centrifugal force. But if the rotation stopped, that force would disappear, and the planet would slowly start reshaping itself. Over time, the Earth would become more spherical. The oceans, no longer held around the equator by spin-induced pressure, would begin migrating toward the poles under the pull of gravity. This massive redistribution of water would drastically alter coastlines and completely reshape the map of the world. Equatorial regions, once lush, warm, and densely populated, would dry up, transforming into barren wastelands. Former coastlines would become desert. Fertile farmlands from South America to Africa would vanish, replaced by cracked earth and salt flats. Mega rivers like the Amazon and Congo would shrink or dry up completely. Meanwhile, the polar regions would become massive oceanic basins. Northern Canada, Russia, Greenland, and Antarctica would flood with icy seawater, forming new superoceans. These frigid waters would not only erase existing landforms, but also radically change the planet's climate systems, possibly triggering a new ice age. This transformation wouldn't just destroy natural habitats, it would upend human civilization. Cities would vanish. Entire countries would become uninhabitable. Billions of people would lose access to drinkable water, arable land, and shelter. The planet, as we know it, would be gone, replaced by a cold alien world where only the adaptable could survive. The collapse of climate and weather systems. Earth's rotation plays a fundamental role in how our atmosphere behaves. It drives the Coriolis effect, which shapes jet streams, trade winds, and ocean currents, the invisible forces that control temperature, rainfall, and storm movement around the planet. If Earth suddenly stopped rotating, all of this would unravel in an instant. Jet streams, those high-altitude winds that guide storms and bring rain to crops, would disappear. Trade winds that have existed for millions of years would collapse. Ocean currents, like the Gulf Stream, which keeps places like Western Europe temperate, would cease to flow. Without them, the planet would lose its natural climate regulation system. The results would be devastating. Vast areas near the equator would become scorching deserts, with temperatures rising to unbearable extremes. Without cloud formation or rainfall, these regions would dry up, their soil turning to lifeless dust. In contrast, regions near the poles would freeze over completely. With no warm ocean currents reaching them, they would become permanent ice sheets, expanding rapidly and reflecting sunlight back into space, accelerating global cooling in those areas. And then there's the storms. Without global air circulation, weather systems wouldn't move. Massive superstorms could form and never leave. Instead of passing through in days, these storms could hover over the same region for months, unleashing continuous rain, snow, or even hail. Coastal cities could face endless hurricanes, while interior regions might suffer unending droughts or year-long blizzards. This extreme instability would collapse ecosystems worldwide. Rainforests would burn. Coral reefs would bleach and die without stable ocean temperatures. Grasslands would become deserts, and icebound forests would vanish. The food chain would break at multiple levels, insects disappearing, fish populations crashing, plants failing to bloom in the absence of predictable seasons. Human agriculture would fail. Famine would spread. The systems we rely on to grow food and source water would no longer work. The Earth wouldn't just be unrecognizable, it would be largely uninhabitable. Goodbye, magnetic field. Hello, cosmic radiation. Deep beneath our feet, the Earth's liquid outer core, made mostly of iron and nickel, spins continuously. This motion generates our geomagnetic field, an invisible force that acts like a planetary shield, deflecting harmful solar winds and cosmic radiation. But if the Earth suddenly stopped rotating, this internal dynamo could shut down. Without rotation, the movement in the molten core would slow dramatically or even stop altogether. And with it, our magnetic field would begin to weaken, possibly even collapse entirely. The consequences would be terrifying. First, solar radiation, the constant stream of charged particles from the sun, would begin to reach the surface in full force. Normally, these particles are diverted around the planet by the magnetic field, but without it, they would penetrate deep into the atmosphere and bombard the ground. Exposure to radiation would skyrocket. Cancer rates would increase dramatically as living tissues absorb the energy from solar and cosmic rays. Children and pregnant women would be especially vulnerable. Even electronics and satellites would be in danger, fried by constant geomagnetic disturbances. And then come the solar flares. Without a magnetic shield, powerful solar storms could cause global blackouts, knocking out satellites, power grids, and communication systems. The internet, GPS, and most modern technologies would be disrupted, possibly permanently in some regions. but the worst effect would come over time. Radiation doesn't just cause short-term damage. Over years and decades, the surface of the Earth would slowly become sterile. UV radiation and cosmic particles would erode DNA in plants, animals, and humans. Crops would fail. Forests would wither. Insects would vanish. Survival would require retreating underground or building thick shielded habitats. Life on the surface would become increasingly impossible, not from lack of food or water, but from the constant invisible assault from space. The sky might look the same, but Earth would no longer be a safe haven. It would be a slowly dying world. One side burns, one side freezes. If the Earth suddenly stopped rotating but kept orbiting the sun, one side of the planet would be exposed to the sun's rays nonstop for months. This constant, unrelenting daylight would cause temperatures to soar, turning that half of the planet into a scorching desert. Without the natural cooling cycle of night, the heat would build up relentlessly, making it nearly impossible for most life forms to survive there. Meanwhile, the other side of the Earth would be locked in eternal darkness, plunged into freezing cold. With no sunlight at all, temperatures would drop drastically, creating vast frozen landscapes covered in ice and snow. This side would become a barren, inhospitable wasteland where very few species could live. Between these two extreme zones lies a thin strip known as the twilight zone, a narrow region where the sun would skim the horizon, providing dim light and more moderate temperatures. This would become the only habitable area on the planet, sparking massive migrations of both humans and animals seeking refuge from the deadly extremes on either side. In these twilight zones, life would struggle but could potentially adapt. The climate here would be harsh and unstable, with violent weather patterns caused by the constant temperature differences between a scorching day side and the freezing night side. Storms, fierce winds, and dramatic temperature swings would become the norm. This new tough reality would force humanity to rethink everything, from where and how to live to how to grow food and find water. Survival would depend on moving to and adapting within these narrow twilight zones, making them the last safe havens on a planet divided by fire and ice. Can humanity survive? If Earth stopped rotating and the extreme conditions became reality, humanity would face an unprecedented survival challenge. The scorched day side and frozen night side would force people to abandon vast regions of the planet. To survive, we might need to build underground cities deep beneath the surface where radiation and harsh weather cannot reach us. These subterranean habitats would protect us from cosmic radiation and deadly storms, creating safe zones shielded from the outside chaos. Inside, we would develop artificial ecosystems, carefully controlled environments where plants and animals could live and reproduce. Dome-covered farmlands could supply food, while advanced technologies like nuclear and geothermal energy would provide the power needed to sustain life underground. However, survival wouldn't come easily. The amount of livable land would shrink dramatically, leading to overcrowding in these twilight zones and underground shelters. Infrastructure above ground would collapse, and the struggle for limited resources like water, food, and energy might spark conflicts, even global wars. Humanity's survival would depend on innovation, cooperation, and resilience. Adapting to a planet divided by extremes would test the limits of our technology and spirit. Could we unite and find solutions, or would the pressure of these catastrophic changes tear societies apart? The future in such a world is uncertain, but one thing is clear. Survival would demand a radical shift in how we live and coexist with the planet and each other. The Earth's spin is more than a simple rotation. It's the delicate balance holding everything together. If it stops, we face extinction-level chaos. Let this serve as a reminder. The more we understand our planet, the better we can protect it. Would we survive? Maybe. But the world would never be the same again.